Hey guys, it's Tori and today I'm going to be doing the philosophy of reading tag. I feel like I was tagged by someone, but I'm not sure who. So if you tagged me, I apologize for totally forgetting who you are. Feel free to let me know and I will link your channel down below. Even if someone didn't tag me, this is one that I've really wanted to do because I really like the question. So I'm just doing it. The tag was originally created by Brandon's Bookshelf, and like I said, it has really interesting questions. So let's just get right into this. The first question is, what's most important, a good character, plot, or message? And this one, I'm very torn between plot and character. I think a good message is really great and it adds to my experience a lot, but I've really enjoyed books that I don't necessarily feel like have a great message or super like moral alongside my morality. So I feel like good character and good plot probably play more of a role. I'm going to say good character because I think that's something that I value more. Like when I read a book that has a good character, I am more likely to have it be a favorite, whereas if it just has a good plot and not really good character development, I'm not very likely to give it a super high rating. Plot and not good characters, I'm more likely to give it a lower rating, like more around a 3 stars, whereas if it has good characters but maybe not a great plot, I'm more likely to give it maybe around 4 stars. So I feel like I'm drawn in more by good characters than good plot. That being said, I technically would prefer a good balance of both. I am okay with a more character-driven story, but it needs to have some level of good plotting that keeps me engaged in the character's development, if that makes sense. So I do like some of both for sure, and a good message is always great too. That my favorite books are going to have all 3 on some level, but I think good characters make more of an impact on me. I am reading these questions off of my computer over to the side, so sorry if I'm looking down while I read these questions, but the second question is, should one read books about ideas or opinions they disagree with? I would say definitely yes. I mean, obviously I would never want to only read that sort of literature because that just gets really grating and it makes it harder to want to read if you're reading books that you don't necessarily love their messages. But I do think books are a great way to explore new ideas and opposing ideas in a way that I feel like is very analytical and thought-provoking, in the fact that you're not really going to be debating with someone. I feel like sometimes if you're having a discussion, it could turn into an argument and then communication isn't really happening. So I feel like books and films on some level too just allow for a discussion to happen, at least on some level, where you're able to give yourself time to absorb other ideas, see what you agree with, what you don't, and I guess gain a deeper respect for the opposing view, or at least on some level gain a greater understanding of where they're coming from. You may still completely disagree with them, but I think it's always important to be open to the opposing view and willing to kind of pick through it and analyze what you agree with and what you don't. And it also helps you strengthen your own opinions when you're able to kind of see what points they're making and then argue against them. So I think there's a lot of value in reading books that portray ideas and opinions that differ from your own. Question 3, as tech advances, what do you think will be the role of books? I don't think books are going to go away. I think most people I talk to tend to say that they prefer physical reading. Not everyone, of course, but I think books are always going to be something people enjoy just picking up, reading the words. Yes, we have like films, television, those sorts of things, but books have a way of getting deep inside the characters' minds, of really bringing out details in a story that you can't really capture in film. So although there are different methods of storytelling nowadays, and I'm sure technology will continue to increase those opportunities, I think books will always be something people enjoy. And barring a huge paper crisis, I think that books will continue to be printed physically, and I think I don't know, they have a way of calming the mind. I think most things nowadays with technology kind of cause a little bit more distraction. It's harder to focus. Your brain ends up being trained to go all over the place because a lot of entertainment is provided really fast. And so I think there's a strengthening power in reading for the mind that I don't think people are going to throw away anytime soon. Okay, I'm gonna try to speed up a little bit. So question 4 is, how important are summaries, reviews, and art in your book choosing? So art, I'm assuming it's meaning like cover art. I do tend to be drawn to pretty books, but I don't necessarily always buy solely books that look good, but I am, like, in a bookstore, I will be drawn to read the synopsis for a more beautiful book. Also, when I watch different people's wrap-ups and things on BookTube, a lot of the time I pay more attention to the covers that draw me in, or there are certain cover styles that tend to be more for certain genres that I know I'm not really interested in. So for example, like contemporary romance, recently there's been kind of those kind of cartoony, sort of colorful type covers, and I'm usually, when I see that, I know that's kind of associated with that genre and that's not something I read, so I tend to tune it out a little bit more. So that has some level of an impact. Reviews and summaries, definitely summaries probably play the biggest role. Like, I'm going to pick up something that sounds good, obviously, but reviews also, there are some books that I've picked up simply because booktubers or other people that I really trust have said they liked it, or maybe it appeared on an award long list or short list or something, or maybe it won an award, and so I'm a little more aware of it and willing to pick it up depending on who reviews it, how many people I hear review it. But even that does still start with a synopsis. Like, if the synopsis that does intrigue me enough and then I hear good reviews, I'm much more likely to pick it up. But if it's a synopsis that doesn't really sound up my alley and a lot of people love it, I'm probably still not gonna pick it up because I know it's not something I read. So I'd say summaries played the biggest role, but art and reviews definitely have some influence on my book choosing. Question 5, should one ever skim or scan a book? I would say I, every once in a while, will skim a little bit if I'm in a kind of slow part. I also will skip through some more sexually explicit content when I'm reading. I just prefer not to get too deep into that, so I'll usually skip over that, scan it a little bit. I also think certain cases where you're reading like a nonfiction book or another book for like an assignment or for whatever reason, if you're writing a review and you just need to review that, obviously that's okay. Yeah, I guess I don't really have super passionate feelings either way about that. I feel like if you feel the need to skim or scan through a book, that is appropriate for you. I don't really care too much. So question 6, should reading always be enjoyable? I would say it depends on what the context of enjoyable would be, because should a book always have a happy ending? Should a book always be super exciting and like a happy experience to read? Not necessarily. I have a lot of books I've read that are more on the sad side that I would say I enjoy, though. They're some of my favorite books, and so, but I would never say like I was like enjoying, I was super happy to be reading it, but I enjoyed it as far as I got something out of it. So I think reading should always, at least reading for fun, should always be enjoyable in the fact that you're reading things that bring you some type of positive experience, whether that be learning something new or gaining a new perspective on something or really growing in sympathy towards people who deal with certain situations. I think those are all enjoyable experiences to grow as a person. Obviously, sometimes you just have to read for whatever reason, whether you're in school or you have to read for some sort of thing for work. Like, there are times when reading's not going to be enjoyable. So should it always be enjoyable? Like, always be enjoyable? Not necessarily, because sometimes you just have to live life and do your responsibilities, but I think when it's for fun, it should always be enjoyable, again, in the fact that you're gaining something from it, whether that even just be like a pleasurable experience or you're like learning from it. I think those are all enjoyable. So I would say yes with that context. Question 7, is it important to be well read? Again, another depends on what you mean by well read. I think for me, it is important for me to be well read. I want to be able to read a lot of the classics. I want to be widely read. I want to experience a wide variety of stories, but I don't like look down on someone else if they don't read as much as me, or if they don't enjoy reading as much as me, or if they haven't read as many classics as me. Like, I don't care as far as other people's experience, but for me personally, I would like to be well read. Question 8, what is your book buying process? So I don't have a super like specific book buying process. I guess some patterns I give myself. Recently, I try to only go book buying at most once a month, but usually it tends to be more like every other month. Right now I haven't announced it because it's just kind of a personal thing, but I'm not on a book buying ban. I'm just trying to limit how many books I'm buying, at least for this year. Not for the money, it's more for the sake of space. Like, I'm still a poor college student and I have a small apartment. I don't have a ton of room for my books. And I do have a lot of books on my TBR, on my physical TBR, so books I have not read yet. I think I have over 100. And so I'm really wanting to get that down a little bit by the end of this year. So that's my goal. As such, I'm, like I said, limiting how much I'm buying, but usually it's about every other month that I'm buying books, and I usually tend to buy more than one at a time. It is very, very rare that I'll buy just one book at a time, and if I do, it's usually like a newer release that I just decide to pick up off Amazon on a whim. But being someone who shops on thrift books and at used bookstores a lot, it's so easy to get sucked into getting multiple books because they're so cheap. So it's rare that I buy one book at a time. I usually buy more than one. And I would also say when I go to a store, I tend to be one that I'll grab a bunch of books, and then at the end I'll kind of sort through them and be like, okay, which ones do I actually really want? And then I put them back nicely where they're supposed to go. Don't worry, I don't like leave them somewhere, but I do kind of do the process of elimination after I've already kind of shopped around, which honestly ends up being mildly fun to do, to just kind of be able to go through the store and be like, I'm getting this and this and this, and be like, okay, which ones do I actually want to narrow it down? So those are some habits I have with book buying. Other than that, I don't really have much else that I do necessarily for my book buying process. Question 9 is, what is your reading process? And again, I don't really have a super specific reading process. I would say there are times when my brain is very, like if I've been doing school all day, or if I've just been on social media, my brain tends to be kind of running at a million miles an hour, and it's a lot harder for me to sit down and focus in on my reading. Like, I'm thinking about all sorts of things. When that happens, I usually like to do an ambiance kind of YouTube, what are they called? They're like ASMR rooms, ambiance type videos on YouTube, just because it helps me, like I have sounds and it's like I'm watching a video, because sometimes my brain wants to just watch things, the quick entertainment. So I'm able to kind of have that feeling of watching a video while being able to kind of zoom in on reading. I also will sometimes with that do like pre-recorded reading sprints, like watch them on BookTube, and so that way I have automatic breaks that people have set up for me, and I'm able to just kind of listen to other people talk even though it's in the past, and that again helps me focus a little bit better on reading. So I'll do those things when I'm, like I said, when my brain's going a million miles an hour and I want to read. Other than that, I don't do too much. I can read just about anywhere. I do tend to prefer to read on like a couch, or I have a little beanbag chair in my room that I'll use to read. But I mean, I've read at like a table before. I like to read outside sometimes. It just kind of varies, but yeah. So not a super specific reading process, but when I do need it, I will have kind of things videos from YouTube playing that will help me focus. Question 10, how do you use what you read? This is a very strange question. I'm assuming like, how do I use the things I learn from what I read? I mean, it adds to discussions. I really like to chat with my family about different ideas and things that are brought up in books that I'm reading. Nonfiction and fiction, like whatever just catches my attention, I really like to discuss with my family, and we'll usually have some really interesting discussions that way. Obviously, recommending books to other people, I love to do that. So when I'm reading great books, I usually will bring that up to people. Yeah, I guess I have nothing else really to add to that. I hope I understood that question right. Question 11 is, if you could download a book to your brain, would you still read? And I guess it would depend on how this would work. If it was a situation where we're downloading the general story to my brain, I would still read, because like with rereads, I know the story, but it's different when you're able to like actually experience it. I guess even if it's like a thing where the words are downloaded to my brain and I'm able to like think through them, I would still read in my head, I guess, just because, I mean, if you have something memorized, for example, like a poem, you are going to go through each word in order to experience it again, right? You're not going to just know it and you just know it and so you move on. You're going to kind of quote it. You're going to say it out loud and that makes you experience it. And so I think reading, part of the power of reading is you're experiencing it in real time a little bit more. And so downloading it to your brain, I don't know necessarily if that means that you would be able to really experience the book still, if that makes sense. Like, I think when you're reading the words, you're in that moment in the story, and I don't know how that would work with it being downloaded to your brain. So I would do what it would take to make sure that I'm able to experience each moment of the book regularly. I just feel like it would be more like a reread situation if I was still to read books that were downloaded to my brain. So I feel like absolutely I would still read. Question 12, what are your views on rereading a book? Well, like I just mentioned, I really enjoy rereading, and I think there's a lot to be learned and gained from rereading a book. As you age, you change, you gain new experiences, and that really can impact your experience with a book. Plus, when you reread it, you are able to notice details you maybe missed before or remember details you maybe forgot that really add to the overall impact of the story. And I just think that's really valuable. It's something that I really like to prioritize as much as I can, to reread books, because it's just enjoyable and there's just so much in books that can be gained, and rereading allows you to really gain as much as you can from a story. Questions 13 and 14 are what make a book good and what make a book bad. And I'm not going to spend too much time on this because I don't really know what I would say, because obviously there's certain things I enjoy in books. I guess in a general sense, like getting outside of my personal opinion about things, I would say that a good book is a book that someone enjoys, that someone gets something from, something positive from, which frankly I think are most books. I would hope most books are published because someone is able to appreciate it and get something positive out of it. What makes a book bad, I guess, would just be that I think if it's detrimental to society and the idea that it puts out ideas that are very hateful and clearly unkind to a group of people, I would say that's probably a bad book, because it is feeding into ideas that can cause people to turn against each other, specifically in a violent and inhumane way. I think books that promote ideas that lead to that sort of thing, well, especially lead directly. I think there's always things where people twist it and it turns into something like that, or there's an idea in it that maybe some people would not consider to be harmful while other people would. Like, there's always things like that. But I think there are some books that have very obvious like racist things where it's like you're genuinely being unkind and inhumane to another group of people. I think things like that could be considered a bad book, but I don't know. I feel like this is something I'd need to like make a whole video on, so we're just gonna stop there. Question 15 is, how do you feel about not finishing a book? I don't really care if people don't finish books. I, every once in a while, won't finish a book. I usually try to finish them, in large part because I have very few books that I've experienced that I really genuinely did not like. There's usually, if I DNF, it's usually because I just am not in the right headspace for it. It's not necessarily that it's a bad book. There have been a few books that I have DNF'd that I just didn't really like, and so I decided, you know what, I'm not going to waste my time with this. It's really annoying me, but that's very rare, relatively, but I don't necessarily have a problem with it. Like, it's not something where I'd force myself through something if I really was struggling. I usually, like I said, I usually just enjoy most of the books I pick up, at least on some level, so I end up finishing them. But if there ever is a book that's really irritating me to the point where I just am struggling so hard to read it, I do not mind putting it down. Question 16, should the author's personal life matter at all? This is always a difficult question. I would say, similar to I feel like a lot of other people's answers, if they're dead, I don't think it necessarily needs to, because obviously you're not giving money to them anymore. Going back to the idea of reading things by people you disagree with, I think there is some value in that. Living authors, I feel like it's a little more tricky. I will say there are some people who maybe have political opinions that I don't agree with, or that are commonly not agreed with, that I may still be open to trying them. I may try to do more like a look for the book at the library, or buy it on a used book site, or wait until I can get it from a friend or something, so that I don't like necessarily pay for it. But I think there are certain actions that I would be a lot more tentative with, things like abuse, like if they are known to have been abusive to someone or anything like that, I probably would be less inclined to read it, especially if they're still alive. But I don't know, I feel like that's definitely something that it's just up to each person. Like if you know something about an author and it really, because I think sometimes too, like you may just be really turned off by an author simply because of what they did, and that may be like you're not interested in their books anymore, and like not in the fact that you're like, well, that synopsis sounds interesting but I'm not going to read it because it's by them, more like in a way where you just don't even care about the synopses. Like even when you hear the synopsis, it's not enough to get you to move past that. I think that does happen sometimes, and it could just, yeah, it could just really turn you off. And I think there's so many books in the world, you know what, just read what you're actually excited about. There's no need to force yourself to read something you really don't care to read, or you're really uncomfortable with reading. Like it doesn't matter. Like I said, there's so many books in the world, you'll find something to read, and it ultimately, in the end, it won't matter that much what you choose to read and what you choose not to. Question 17. If you could only read one genre for the rest of time, what would it be? That is so hard. I feel like I'd probably go for historical fiction, because I think there's just a lot you can play with that. You can do all sorts of different time periods, so there's a lot to work with as far as that goes. There's also some magical realism or historical fantasy type historical fiction that you can read that adds a little bit extra something to it. There are a lot of classics that are historical fiction, so I can still have classics in my life, which would be wonderful and much appreciated. So I feel like historical fiction would cover the most bases for what sorts of things I'm interested in reading. On second thoughts, I might actually say historical nonfiction, because then I feel like I'd still have the opportunity to learn and experience a lot that way, but it still has very interesting like stories within it, so I would get at least a flavor of fiction, sort of, at least as far as the storytelling aspect. Plus you could probably get away with like reading about people's mythology, because if you're learning about it in a sense of it, this is what people believed, and then these are the stories of things they believed in, then it would still add a bit of, you know, that kind of fantasy or, yeah, just story element to the experience. So I actually think I would say historical nonfiction, now that I'm thinking a little bit deeper about it. Question 18, do you ever read a book without knowing anything about it? Sometimes I do, especially with classics. I tend to avoid spoilers as much as possible, which requires pretty much avoiding a lot of synopses. So there's been several classics I've read that I didn't really know much about. I maybe had a very vague idea about what it was about. I own several that I really know nothing about. More recently written books is usually, it doesn't usually happen quite as much that I'm willing to pick up something that I know nothing about, but every once in a while it has happened, and it's kind of a fun experience to be able to do that. Question 19, what author, genre, series, or culture can you just not get into, and why? I think for this, there's a few things I could go with, but I'm going to say graphic novels for now. I have not read that many, so this is definitely something that could change, but the graphic novels and things that I have read, I just do not love the experience of reading them. Like, it just doesn't quite meet what I love in reading. And so even though I will appreciate the art in a lot of graphic novels, the art styles, I have yet to find a graphic novel that I really enjoy the experience of reading. So I'm going to say that for now. Things can always change. I could find one day that really amazes me, but that has yet to happen. And question 20, do you think everyone should read, and why? I do think everybody should read at least a little bit in their lives. I think people who absolutely refuse to read are missing out on something really great. And I do think that believe that there is a book that will work for everyone. At least each person will be able to find a book that they enjoy if they just give it a chance and really look for things they are interested in. Do I think everybody needs to be a booktuber or necessarily read as much as a lot of people on BookTube do, or read even as much as I do? No, I don't. I think that would be ridiculous to expect that of anyone who doesn't really care to read. But I think reading at least one book a year is very beneficial, and I think society would really be positively impacted by having everybody be a little bit more of a reader than maybe they are currently. And studies have shown that readers, people who read books regularly, are more sympathetic and more empathetic towards other people, and I frankly think that's something that society could very much benefit from if more people were that way. So I would say yes, as far as I think everybody should prioritize reading at least a little bit more in their lives, but that doesn't necessarily mean everybody needs to read a ton of books every year or even more than one book a year. Yeah, overall I think it would be a positive benefit in society. So that is the tag. This was so long, I apologize for that, but I'm not going to tag anybody because it's a pretty old tag. So if you want to do it and haven't yet, feel free to consider yourself tagged. Thank you so much for watching, and I will talk to you next time. Bye!